The child in the snow, the wind howled across the frozen plain, carrying sharp needles of snow that cut against bare skin. The night sky was a heavy blanket of black, hiding the stars behind thick storm clouds. In the middle of this endless white wasteland, a tiny figure lay curled up in the snow, shivering. She was no taller than a human child of 6 years, but her features were not human. Her skin was pale lavender, glowing faintly under the moonlight that broke through the clouds. Her large eyes, a soft glowing blue, were half-closed, heavy. With exhaustion, thin strands of silver hair were stuck to her cheeks. Frozen stiff by the cold, she wore nothing but a torn tunic, the fabric too thin to fight the deadly cold. Around her neck hung a small, broken charm, the metal cracked as if once part of something bigger. Her lips trembled as she whispered something in her language. A name, perhaps, maybe her mother's. The snow beneath her was already starting to cover her small body. Every breath came out as a weak cloud of mist, smaller each time. Her tiny hands were curled around her chest, as if trying to keep the last bit of warmth inside. Her legs barely moved, stiff from the cold, somewhere far away. A sound broke the silence, a low, deep growl. It was the sound of a predator that hunted in the snow. The girl's eyes opened a little wider, fear sparking inside. From the darkness beyond the blowing snow, a shape moved, then another, tall, four-legged creatures with thick white fur, glowing golden eyes, and teeth that caught the moonlight. Snow lions, the hunters of this planet, silent killers that could wait for hours before striking. The first lion stepped closer, its large paws making no sound. The girl tried to push herself backward, but her arms gave out. Her heartbeat quickened. Her breath came faster. The cold now mixed with terror. The lions spread out, circling slowly, their tails twitching. They could smell her fear. They could sense her weakness. And then another sound cut through the storm. Heavy footsteps crunching in the snow. The lions stopped for a moment, their ears twitching through the curtain of snow. A tall figure appeared. He was wrapped in a thick brown coat, goggles over his eyes, a scarf covering his face. In his hands, he carried a long rifle, slung with extra gear on his back. Each step was slow but firm, his boots sinking deep into the snow. When he saw the tiny girl lying on the ground, his pace quickened. He knelt beside her, pulling off one glove to touch her cheek. The skin was ice cold, almost lifeless. "Stay with me, kid," he muttered under his breath. She blinked at him weakly, her breath catching in her throat. He pulled a thick thermal blanket from his pack, wrapping it around her small frame. But before he could lift her, the low growl came again, closer this time. He looked up, eyes narrowing. The snow lions were now fully visible, their large bodies swaying as they moved. 3 of them, each as tall as a human chest, their white fur blending perfectly with the snow. Only their glowing eyes betrayed their positions. The man shifted his rifle into his hands, his finger brushing the trigger. The lions kept coming. Unafraid, he knew that shooting one might scare the others, or it might make them charge. The girl's small fingers gripped the edge of his coat. Her voice was barely a whisper. "Don't leave me." He kept his eyes on the predators, slowly stepping in front of her. The storm screamed around them, snow swirling in violent gusts. The lions spread wider, trying to trap them in a half circle. The man took a deep breath, steadying his aim. He fired one shot into the air. The crack of the rifle echoed like thunder. The lions froze for a heartbeat, their ears flicking back. Then the largest one bared its teeth and stepped forward. The man's jaw tightened. "This is going to be bad," he muttered. The girl could see his breath turning to steam in the freezing air. She could see the muscles in his arms tense as he readied the rifle again. The wind howled louder, as if the storm itself was waiting to see what would happen. The lions lowered their bodies, tails lashing the signal before the attack. One of them let out a roar, Shaking the snow from the ground, the man took a single step forward. Planting himself firmly in the snow, his finger tightened on the trigger. The girl's eyes were wide, her heart pounding so hard she thought it would break. The first lion lunged and the world exploded into motion. Teeth in the dark, the snow lion's leap was silent until the last moment. Then came the heavy thud of its paws hitting the snow and the sharp flash of teeth. The man raised his rifle, fired once, and the blast lit the night for a heartbeat. The bullet struck the lion's shoulder. It roared in pain. Twisting in the air before landing hard, the other two lions reacted instantly, their growls turning into deep, rumbling snarls. One darted to the left, trying to flank him, while the other lowered its head for a straight charge. The man moved fast, pushing the tiny alien child behind a small mound of snow. "Stay down. Don't move," he barked, though his voice was calm and firm. Her wide blue eyes stared up at him, her lips trembling. She clutched the blanket tighter, as if the thin fabric could keep the danger away. The first charging lion came in low, its claws digging into the snow for speed. The man stepped to the side and fired again, the shot echoing in the frozen air. This time, the bullet grazed its neck, sending a spray of white fur into the storm. The beast roared, but didn't stop. Lunging again, he barely managed to dodge, the creature's claws tearing the edge of his coat. He swung the rifle like a club, smashing the butt into the lion's jaw. It staggered back, growling, steam rising from its open mouth from the corner of his eye. He saw movement. The third lion was almost at the child. His stomach tightened. He didn't think, he just ran, boots pounding in the snow. The predator's glowing eyes were locked on the small figure, its muscles ready to strike. At the last second, the man dove forward, shoving his body between the beast and the child. They both tumbled into the snow, the lion's hot breath washing over his face. The smell was awful, a mix of blood and wet fur. The man's gloved hand shot to his side, pulling the long hunting knife from its sheath with one powerful thrust. He drove it upward into the lion's throat. The creature jerked violently, a deep gurgle escaping its mouth before collapsing. In the snow, the girl's small voice was a trembling whisper. You killed it." He glanced back at her, his face partly hidden by the scarf. "They were going to kill you," he said simply, pulling the blanket tighter around her. But there was no time to rest. The other two lions were still circling, their growls deeper now, more dangerous. One of them limped from the gunshot, but its golden eyes still burned with hunger. The man kept his body between them and the child. Snow swirled around them, making the predator's shapes blur in and out of sight. They were testing him now, waiting for the perfect moment. He pulled a flare from his belt, lit it, and threw it into the snow ahead of the lions. The sudden red light hissed, casting strange shadows across their white fur. For a moment, the beasts backed away, unsure. He didn't waste the chance. He lifted the child into his arms and began moving. The snow was deep, his legs heavy, but he kept going. Behind them, the lions' growls rose again. They were following, keeping just out of range. The storm was thickening, the world shrinking into a wall of white. The man's mind raced. He needed shelter, somewhere with solid walls. He remembered passing an old alien outpost earlier in the day, half buried under snow. It was risky, but better than freezing to death in the open. "Hold on," he told the girl, his breath coming in short bursts. She buried her face into his coat, trying to hide from the cold and the sound of the lions. The trek through the snow was slow, each step a battle. His boots crunched, his breath steamed, and his muscles burned from carrying her. The growls behind them came and went, sometimes closer, sometimes farther. Once, he looked back and caught sight of two golden eyes just beyond the blowing snow. They weren't giving up. At last, a dark, Shape appeared in the storm, the outline of the abandoned outpost. Its roof was half collapsed under heavy snow, and its walls were scarred by years of wind. But to him, it looked like salvation. He pushed forward, ignoring the ache in his legs. The door was frozen shut, the metal biting against his gloves. He kicked it hard twice before it gave way with a loud crack. Snow spilled inside as he stepped in, slamming it closed behind him. Inside, the air was still cold. But without the biting wind, he set the girl down on a dusty metal crate and quickly searched the room. It was dark, lit only by the dim light coming through a small crack in the wall. Old equipment lay scattered, some buried in snow that had blown inside over the years. The walls groaned under the force of the storm outside. He found a broken heater in the corner. Useless without power, but there was wood from old crates. Enough to make a small fire. The girl watched him work, her eyes unblinking. "Why did you save me?" she asked softly, her voice still shaking. He paused for a moment, meeting her gaze, because no one else would. He replied, striking a match. The small flame caught on the wood, sending a warm orange glow into the room. She edged closer to the fire, holding her small hands out to the heat outside. Faint scratching sounds began against the wall. The man froze, his eyes narrowing. The lions had followed them here, and they weren't leaving anytime soon. The shelter of the wind outside screamed like a living thing. Every few seconds, snow slammed against the walls of the old outpost, shaking loose flakes of frost from the ceiling. Inside, the fire flickered weakly, its small warmth a fragile shield. Against the cold, the man sat with his back to the wall, his rifle resting across his knees. The little alien child sat near the fire, knees drawn to her chest, the blanket still wrapped tightly around her small body. Her blue eyes followed him silently, as if trying to understand who he was. For a long time, neither spoke. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the storm beyond the walls. From outside came the low, dragging sound of claws against metal. The man's eyes moved toward the door. Then to the cracked wall on his left. The predators were still out there, pacing, waiting. Snow lions could wait for hours, even days, if their prey was worth it. He slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a small pouch. Inside were hard ration. Bars not much, but enough for the night. He broke one in half and offered it to the girl. She hesitated, then took it with small shaking hands. She sniffed it, as if unsure, then took a careful bite. Her face showed surprise. It was the first time she'd eaten something warm in days, maybe weeks. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She looked at him for a long moment before answering. "Luma," she said, her voice barely louder than the fire. "Luma," he repeated, as if testing the sound. "I'm Kane." She nodded once, then lowered her gaze back to the fire. Kane leaned back against the wall, watching her. Her skin had regained a little color, but she was still weak. He could see the marks of frostbite on her fingers and the bruises on her thin arms. He didn't ask how she ended up here. Alone in the snow, he could guess. Many villages had been abandoned when the storms grew worse. Those left behind didn't last long. Luma's eyes flicked toward the wall again. The scratching had stopped, but now there was a soft, steady thump. Kane knew the sound. A predator's body leaning against the wall. Testing it, they're trying to find a way in, he said quietly. Her small hands tightened around the blanket. "Will they eat us?" she asked, voice trembling. "Not if I can help it," Kane replied, his tone steady. The fire crackled, sending faint shadows dancing on the walls. Kane's eyes scanned the room, looking for anything useful. A metal pipe, some broken panels, pieces of wiring may be enough to reinforce the door. He moved quietly, setting down his rifle only long enough to drag a heavy crate in front of the entrance. The old metal groaned under the weight, but it would hold. For now, Luma watched him work, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke. "Why did you?" "Come here. Humans don't live on this world." Cain gave a faint smile under his scarf. "Not many. No. I came for supplies. Got caught in the storm." She tilted her head slightly. "So, you weren't looking for me." He shook his head. "Didn't know you were out here." For a moment, her face fell, and she turned back toward the fire. "But," Cain added, "once I saw you, there was no way I was leaving you behind." Something in her posture shifted, not fully trust, but something close. She moved a little closer to him, the firelight reflecting in her eyes. "Everyone else left," she whispered. "My family, my people. They ran. The snow lions came, and—" Her voice caught, the rest of the words lost. Cain didn't press her. Instead, he reached into his pack again and pulled out his canteen. "Here, drink slow." She took it carefully, sipping the water as if each drop mattered. Hours passed. Like this, quiet, with only the fire's glow and the sound of the storm outside. Cain stayed awake, listening to the faint movements of the predators. Luma, exhausted, began to drift off, her small head resting against the crate she sat on. Her breathing slowed, her tiny hands still clutching the blanket. Cain's eyes softened for a moment as he watched her sleep. She looked so fragile, so breakable, yet she had survived this far. Alone, suddenly, the quiet was broken by a deep, guttural growl right outside the door. Cain froze, his hand moving to his rifle. A loud bang followed, the whole wall shuddering. As something heavy slammed into it, Luma woke with a startled gasp. Clutching the blanket tighter, the growls multiplied. There were at least 3 of them now. Maybe more. They weren't just testing the walls anymore. They were trying to break through. Cain moved closer to the door, his rifle raised. The banging came again. Harder this time, the old hinges rattled and a thin line of snow fell from the frame. He glanced back at Luma. "Stay behind the fire. Don't move unless I tell you." Her eyes were wide, but she nodded quickly. Outside, the scraping turned into a deep, steady tearing sound. One of the walls had a weak spot, and the lions had found it. Cain's grip on the rifle tightened. He could feel the tension in the air. The moment before everything would break, the fire popped loudly, throwing sparks into the air. And then, with a deafening crash, the wall gave way. The long night the crash shook the entire outpost. Wood splinters and bits of frozen metal flew across the room as a gaping hole opened in the wall. Snow blasted through, swirling into the fire and making it hiss and sputter through the opening. Cain saw them 3 massive snow lions. Their fur glistened with frost, and their golden eyes burned in the darkness. Each step they took was slow and deliberate, their claws leaving deep marks in the snow-covered floor. The lead lion, larger than the rest, opened its mouth and released a low growl that made the air vibrate. Cain stepped forward, rifle in hand, his boots grinding against the frozen floor. Behind him, Luma scrambled backward, clutching the blanket, her eyes wide with terror. The firelight flickered against her face, showing every small tremor. Cain's voice was calm but firm. "Stay down." No matter what, the first lion leaped through the hole. Snow sprang into the air. Cain fired instantly. The crack of the shot echoed through the storm. The bullet hit its shoulder, making it stumble, but not stop. The second lion slipped inside right behind it, teeth bared. Cain swung the rifle like a club, smashing the butt into its face. It roared, a hot cloud of breath spilling into the cold room. The third predator stayed just outside, pacing, watching. For a chance to strike, Cain backed up toward the center of the room, keeping his body between Luma and the attackers. His mind raced. He had only a few bullets left, and once those were gone, it would be steel against claws. The wounded lion lunged again. Cain sidestepped, slamming his boot into its side to knock it away. He fired at the second one, the shot punching through its chest. It staggered but didn't fall, its growl turning into a deep snarl. Blood steamed on the floor where it dripped, but the cold was already freezing it into dark ice. Luma cried out as the third lion finally leaped through the hole. It didn't go for Cain, it went for her. Her small hands gripped the crate beside her as she tried to crawl away. Luma! Cain shouted, throwing himself toward her. The lion was faster. It swiped at her with one massive paw. The crate toppled over, knocking her to the floor just out of reach of the claws. Cain slammed into the beast's side, tackling it in two. The wall, the impact rattled the entire room. They rolled on the ground, Cain's hands gripping his knife as the lion's teeth snapped inches from his face. The smell of its breath was a mix of blood and rot. He shoved the blade upward into its neck. Hot blood splashed against his gloves. The lion roared and thrashed, but Cain held on until its movements slowed. Finally, it slumped against the floor, the light fading from its eyes. But there was no time to breathe. The first lion, its shoulder bleeding, charged again. This time, Cain wasn't fast enough. It slammed into him, sending him sprawling across the floor. His rifle skidded away, landing near the wall. The predator stalked toward him, muscles rippling, its golden eyes locked on his throat. Luma's small voice cut through the chaos. Cain. He glanced. She had grabbed one of the burning sticks from the fire. Her hand shook, but she held it out like a weapon, the flames flickering in her eyes. The lion hesitated, its ears flattening at the sudden light. Cain used the moment. Rolling to his side, he grabbed his rifle. He aimed point blank and fired. The shot tore through its chest, the force knocking it back into the broken wall. It collapsed in the snow outside. Motionless, silence fell, broken only by the sound of the storm. Cain's breath came in short, ragged bursts. Luma dropped the burning stick, her hands trembling. He walked over, crouched down, and checked her over quickly. "You okay?" She nodded, though her voice was small. "You didn't leave me." "Not planning to," he replied. They dragged the broken crates toward the gap in the wall, piling them to block the wind and keep out more predators. The fire burned low. The wood nearly gone, Cain handed her another small piece of ration. "Eat. You'll need your strength." She ate slowly, her gaze never leaving the flames. For a while, they sat in silence, the storm's howl filling the air at some point in the long night. Cain noticed Luma's head start to droop. Her eyelids fluttered, her breathing slowed. He shifted his coat and let her lean against his side, wrapping the blanket tighter around. Her small frame was warm against the cold metal of his armor. Even with danger outside, she was too exhausted to stay awake. Cain stayed alert, listening to the faint movements beyond the walls. The snow lions were still out there, circling, waiting for another chance. The hours stretched endlessly. Sometimes there was a sudden bang against the wall. Sometimes only the sound of claws scraping the frozen metal. But they never broke in again. The storm outside began to fade, the howling wind softening into a steady whisper. Dawn was approaching, and with it, a chance to escape battle in the cold. The pale light of dawn crept across the snow. It seeped through the cracks in the damaged wall, painting the inside of the shelter in a faint, cold glow. Cain stood by the hole, his rifle in hand, scanning the silent white landscape outside. The storm had passed, but the danger had not. The snow was deep, unbroken except for the faint paw prints that circled the outpost. Steam rose from the frozen bodies of the two snow lions they had killed during the night, but Cain knew there were more predators. This patient didn't give up so easily. Behind him, Luma stirred under the blanket. Rubbing her eyes, she looked smaller than ever in the morning light, her silver hair messy and her face pale. Cain turned to her. "We can't stay here," he said. She nodded, clutching the blanket like a shield. "Where will we go?" "There's a signal beacon a few kilometers from here," he explained. "If we reach it, Rescue might come. Luma glanced toward the hole in the wall, her voice small. The lions? Cain crouched in front of her, meeting her eyes. Veil. Follow. But we'll be faster. He handed her a small pouch of dried food and filled her cup with water from his canteen. Eat now. We move as soon as you're ready. Minutes later. They stepped outside into the blinding white. The air was sharp and clean after the storm. But it cut into their lungs like knives. Cain kept Luma close, carrying her when the snow grew too deep for her short legs. Her small arms clung to his neck. Her face pressed against his coat to hide from the cold wind. They had barely gone 100 meters when Cain saw movement in the distance. Golden eyes flashing against the snow. Low shapes slinking between icy ridges. Snow lions. 3 of them. Their white fur almost invisible except for the slow ripple of muscle beneath. They're here, Cain muttered, tightening his grip on his rifle. Luma turned her head slightly, catching a glimpse, and froze in fear. Cain's voice was steady. Don't look at them. Look at me. The predators began to fan out, trying to circle around. Cain adjusted his path, heading toward a line of jagged rocks half buried in snow. They could give him cover or trap him if he wasn't careful. The crunch of his boots was joined by the faint pad of paws. He could feel the tension building. Like the air before a lightning strike, without warning, the first lion broke into a sprint. Cain swung the rifle up and fired. The shot rang out. Echoing across the frozen plain, the beast stumbled but didn't fall. Its roar ripping through the morning air, the other 2 lunged forward. Closing the distance fast, Cain ran for the rocks, snow spraying under his boots. He reached the first boulder and set Luma down behind it. Stay here. No matter what you hear, he ordered. She grabbed his coat, eyes wide. Don't go too far. I won't, he promised, and turned back toward the predators. The first lion came around the side, teeth bared. Cain fired again. The bullet struck deep, and the creature collapsed in the snow. But the second was already leaping. He dropped to one knee and swung the rifle like a club, smashing it into the beast's jaw. It yelped but landed hard, spinning for another attack. The third stayed back, pacing, waiting for an opening. Cain's breath was sharp in the cold air, his hands steady despite the pounding of his heart. The second lion charged again, claws reaching for his chest. He stepped aside at the last second, plunging his knife into its side. The beast roared, twisting violently, nearly tearing the blade from his grip. Blood sprayed onto the snow, steaming in the frigid air. The lion collapsed in a heap, its breath coming in ragged gasps before it went still. The last predator made its move. It darted toward the rocks, toward Luma. Her small cry cut through the air. Cain sprinted, his legs burning. The lion reached the edge of the boulder, claws scraping the stone as it tried to climb over. Luma backed up, her tiny hands searching for something, anything, to defend herself. Cain's shot cracked through the air, the bullet slamming into the beast's shoulder. It fell back into the snow, roaring in pain, but didn't stay down. The creature lunged again, this time straight at Cain. They collided, crashing into the snow. The weight of the beast pressed down, its hot breath in his face. Cain jammed the knife upward into its chest. Pushing with all his strength, the lion's roar turned into a wet, choking sound before it finally slumped onto him. He shoved it aside, breathing hard, his gloves slick with blood. Silence returned, broken only by the wind. Cain stood, brushing snow from his coat, and went to Luma. She was shaking, but she threw her arms around him the moment he knelt beside her. "You're not hurt?" he asked, scanning her quickly. She shook her head. "You came back, always," he said. Lifting her into his arms again, the signal beacon was still far away. But now the plain ahead of them was quiet. The lions gone for the moment. Cain tightened his grip on her and began walking again, The cold bit into him, but he didn't slow. Every step took them closer to safety, and every step, he knew, might be their last chance. The escape the wind had softened, but the cold was sharper now. Each breath Kane took felt like shards of ice cutting into his lungs. The horizon ahead was a pale line between the endless white ground and the silver sky. And there, faint but real, the signal beacon's light blinked in the distance. It looked close, but Kane knew the truth. On this frozen world, distance was deceptive. The beacon was still hours away, and he had no idea if the way was clear. Luma's head rested on his shoulder. She was awake, but quiet, her arms wrapped around his neck to stay warm. Every so often she glanced behind them, her blue eyes searching the snow. "Kane," she whispered, "they'll come back, won't they?" "Maybe," he said honestly. "That's why we keep moving." He adjusted his grip and pushed forward. Each step sank deep into the snow, his legs heavy with exhaustion. But the thought of stopping never entered his mind. After a while, the air grew too still. It was the kind of silence that didn't feel safe, a silence that hid danger. Kane's instincts flared. He turned his head slowly, scanning the empty white behind them. At first, there was nothing. Then a flicker of movement, far away. A low shape against the snow, slipping between small ridges, golden eyes catching the light. Snow lions, 3. No, 4 of them this time, and they were following, moving in that patient, stalking way that meant they were waiting for the right moment to strike. Kane quickened his pace, his boots crunching faster. Luma tightened her grip around him. "There?" "Closer," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I know," Kane said, his breath steaming in the air. The beacon's light blinked steadily, almost teasing them, but between them and safety stretched a wide, flat plain. No cover, no rocks, nowhere to hide. If the lions attacked here, it would be a straight fight. He kept walking, forcing himself not to run yet. Running too soon would trigger the chase. He needed to time it right. Minutes passed. The predator's shapes drawing nearer, their paws left silent prints in the snow, their movements almost graceful. Then came the sound, a low growl, rolling across the frozen air. The signal, they were ready to strike. "Hold on," Kane muttered, shifting Luma higher on his back. Her face pressed against his coat. Then he broke into a run. The snow slowed him, but adrenaline pushed him forward. Behind them, the lions surged into motion, their roars cut through the silence. Echoing across the plain, the sound of paws pounding in the snow grew louder. Kane risked a glance back. The lead lion was only 20 meters behind. Its teeth flashed, its breath steaming. He aimed his rifle over his shoulder and fired without stopping. The shot cracked, snow sprang up near the beast. It swerved, but didn't slow. The beacon was closer now, maybe 500 meters. Too far if the lions caught them. Another one lunged from the side, trying to cut them off. Kane turned, sharply, stumbling, but staying upright. His boots slipped on the ice hidden beneath the snow. The rifle bucked in his hands as he fired again. The shot hit, and the lion tumbled into the snow, rolling in a spray of white. But the others were still coming. The plain seemed endless. Every step felt heavier, his muscles screaming. Luma's voice broke through his focus. "Kane, they're right there." The largest predator was nearly on them. Kane spun, planting his feet. He raised the rifle and fired point blank. The bullet punched through its chest. The lion fell, sliding across the snow with a final growl. 2 left. They slowed for just a second, wary now, but Kane knew they wouldn't stay back for long. The beacon loomed ahead, a tall metal tower, the base surrounded by a low wall. He ran for it, his breath ragged. The last stretch felt like a lifetime. The roars behind them grew louder again, the final charge. The gates of the beacon post were open just enough to slip through. Kane shoved Luma inside first, then turned to face the predators. They were close enough now that he could see the frost clinging to their whiskers. He fired the last of his rounds. The sound echoing like thunder. One lion dropped. The other swerved away at the last second. It circled, growling, but didn't follow them inside. Cain slammed the gate shut, the metal rattling. The lion paced outside. Eyes locked on them. Then, slowly, it turned and melted back into the white. Only the sound of the wind remained inside the beacon post. Warmth from the heaters wrapped around them like a blanket. Luma slid to the floor, her small body trembling from both cold and fear. Cain knelt beside her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said. Her blue eyes looked up at him, full of relief and something deeper. "You came." "All the way for me," she whispered. "Yeah," Cain replied with a faint smile. "And I'd do it again." The beacon's lights pulsed, sending their signal into the frozen sky. Help would come, but for now. Cain knew this. They had survived the snow, the lions, and the long night. And as long as he was there, Luma would never be alone again. Light in the storm, the beacon's rhythmic pulse lit the room in soft flashes. Every few seconds, a bright light swept across the snow outside, reaching into the endless white. Cain stood near the window slit, his rifle empty but still in his hands, out of habit. Outside, the storm clouds had begun to shift, letting pale sunlight spill over the frozen plain. Luma sat on a bench near one of the heaters, her small hands wrapped around a cup of warm water Cain had found in the supply cabinet. The heat had brought some color back to her lavender skin, but her eyes still carried the exhaustion of the last 2 days. Every so often, she glanced at Cain as if checking he was still there. "How long until they come?" she asked quietly. Cain kept his eyes on the horizon. Could be minutes, could be hours. But someone will hear the signal. She nodded slowly. Hugging the blanket tighter around herself, the silence between them was broken by a faint, distant hum. Cain's head lifted immediately. His body tense, the hum grew louder, turning into the steady thrum of engines. He crossed the room to the outer door, pushing it open just enough to look outside. In the distance, cutting through the snow-filled air, a dark shape approached, a small rescue skimmer, its lights flashing. Luma's eyes widened when she saw it through the crack. "They're here," she whispered, almost in disbelief. Cain gave a short nod, but didn't relax. Predators didn't care if rescue was near. And sure enough, before the skimmer could land, movement caught his eye near the ridge. Golden eyes, 3 pairs, watching from the snow. The lions were back, and they weren't finished. "Stay inside," Cain told Luma firmly. She gripped the edge of the bench, her knuckles pale, but no arguments, he said, already stepping out into the cold. The wind bit at his face as he moved to stand between the beacon post and the approaching predators. His rifle was empty, but his knife was still at his belt. And he picked up a length of metal pipe from beside the gate. The snow lions crept closer, their movements slow and deliberate. They knew their prey was cornered. The skimmer's engines roared as it descended. The sound startled the beasts for a moment, but didn't drive them away. Cain planted his boots in the snow. Gripping the pipe with both hands, the lead lion let out a roar and charged. Snow spraying under its massive paws, Cain waited until it was almost on him. Then he sidestepped and swung the pipe with all his strength. The metal rang out as it connected with the side of the beast's head. The lion staggered, growling, but recovered quickly, circling again. The second and third lions moved in from the sides, forcing Cain to turn constantly from the corner of his eye. He saw the skimmer touch down and its side door slide open, too. Figures in heavy rescue gear jumped out, weapons ready, shots cracked through the air. The sound echoing across the frozen plain. One of the lions fell into the snow, its body still. The others hesitated, the sudden gunfire making them reconsider. Another burst of shots rang out. and the remaining two turned, retreating into the blinding white until they disappeared. Kane lowered the pipe, his breath coming in sharp clouds. The rescue crew ran. Up to him, one clapping a hand on his shoulder. "You the one who sent the beacon?" "Yeah," Kane said, glancing back toward the door. "There's a kid inside." They followed him into the beacon post, and Luma's eyes lit up when she saw the new arrivals. One of the rescuers knelt beside her, checking her pulse and asking gentle questions. Kane stood by the door, letting himself finally exhale within minutes. They had her wrapped in a fresh thermal blanket and ready to board the skimmer. She hesitated before stepping out, looking over her shoulder at Kane. "You're coming too, right?" Kane gave a small smile. "I'm not letting you out of my sight." The skimmer's cabin was warm, the vibration of the engines humming through the seats. Luma sat beside Kane, leaning against his arm, her eyes half closed but still awake. Through the window, the frozen world began to shrink behind them. The beacon tower was just a small black shape against the endless white. For the first time in what felt like forever, Luma let herself breathe without fear. Kane rested a hand on her shoulder, his gaze on the horizon ahead. In his mind, he replayed every step, the snow, the shelter, the lions, the fight, but he didn't regret a single moment when the skimmer broke through the last layer of storm clouds. Sunlight flooded the cabin. It painted Luma's silver hair in gold, and for the first time since he'd found her, she smiled fully. "You saved me," she said softly. Kane shook his head. "We saved each other." Below them, the snow lions prowled unseen. The storm would come again, but for now, in the light above the clouds, the tiny alien child was safe, and as long as Kane lived, she would never have to sleep alone in the snow again.